Well, hello everyone, welcome back to Cars with Willow, and welcome to my sofa, which wasn't where I was planning on filming my next video, I'll be honest with you. But last few weeks my car's been off the road, I've not been able to make any videos, not been able to go out for drives. It's actually been a really boring time for me. When I can't get out and drive, I get bored very quickly, which is why actually I've resorted to the lowest of lows, the puzzle compendium, which is what I now fill my time with in the evenings. So it's about time that I get my car back on the road. Now it's actually quite a peculiar issue that's occurred with the car, which I'll show you a bit later on, but I'm hoping it just might be a fairly straightforward fix. I know that that's famous last words for anyone that's about to work on their car, especially an MG, but the best way to find out, I think, is to just go and have a look at the car. I'll show you what's wrong with it and then we'll give it a good go. Now, before we get started on fixing the car, I thought I'd just give you a little bit of background information about what's wrong with it. I was driving along a little while ago, a fairly spirited drive, I suppose you would say, and all of a sudden my electrics started to go. So first it was the battery light, and I thought, okay, that's strange, but you know, I've had the battery quite a while, maybe that's just on its way out. And then it was the power steering light, and I thought, oh, okay, well that's not great, maybe there's a deeper issue here. Then it was the ABS light, and at this point I was thinking, yeah, something's definitely up here, something's wrong. And I managed to nurse it home without power steering or ABS, pretty sketchy. And it was dark, so I thought, alright, well I'll park up and I'll take a look in the morning. So I had the inspection cover off the engine, I had a little look around the engine, and it didn't take too long for me to realise what had happened. And you might not believe this, but I'll show you a clip now of what had happened. Now you're probably wondering, William, was the car not incredibly loud? Surely you'd have known that the manifold was coming off the engine block. And you're right, it was loud, it was very loud, but the thing is, for the last few weeks now, I've known that the catalytic converter is sort of on its way out as well, which had made it quite a lot louder. When I say on its way out, it was well gone. And of course it would be juvenile and irresponsible to drive around without a catalytic converter, so I wouldn't do that, but that's kind of what I put the noise down to, the fact that I knew that was on its way out. And so I was quite shocked actually to see that the exhaust manifold had completely detached itself from the block. So you might be wondering now, well, why did that cause the electrics to go? Well, obviously the manifold gets hot, and when it detached itself from the block, it then rested on top of the alternator. And as you can see, it completely melted sort of the plug that goes into the regulator. So the regulator's had it. I'm hoping that the alternator itself is fine. And today we're going to switch out the regulator and the plug, and hopefully that might solve the problem. Now, just before we go on with the video, I feel like I should add a small disclaimer, because I was just sat here editing it, and I actually filmed it probably 2 or 3 months ago now, and at the time I thought that replacing the regulator on the alternator had solved the issue, and it did for a while, but a couple of months down the line I started to have some more intermittent issues with the alternator, and once again I had all the problems with the electrics cutting out, and so I thought, right, it's probably, you know, to be honest, the problem is with the alternator, and I was hoping to avoid replacing that when I film this video just because I'm quite lazy. But in the end I have had to replace the alternator. That being said, I'm still going to show you what I do in the video. I'm still going to show you the process I went through to replace the regulator, because even though it didn't solve the problem entirely, it still might be useful for you. So let's get on with the video. So as I mentioned earlier, we've already had this inspection panel off. If you came here to find out how to take that off, then I have actually done a video on that already. So pause this video, head over to that one and watch it, and then come back. I'll wait. Great, now you know how to take the inspection panel off. Now we can take a look inside the engine, and I'll show you where the issue has occurred and what seems to have happened, and then we can look at fixing it. Okay, so when we look inside, you can see straight away that the manifold has detached itself. So of course that's one thing we need to sort. And if you look further inside, you might be able to see here, it's quite awkward to get to, you might be able to see that the alternator regulator has melted, and it's actually sort of detached itself. You can see there how it should be attached to these two prongs, but it's completely detached. Now the first thing you want to do before you refit a new gasket anywhere is make sure that any residue from the previous gasket is gone. Now looking at mine, it looks pretty clear, as in none of the old gasket seems to be stuck on the block or the manifold, but it might be a bit more straightforward for me. I'm going to give it a wipe just to make sure that there's nothing loose on there. But if there is any of your old gaskets still on there, then just use a chisel or something like that just to get the old residue off. So with the block and the manifold all cleaned up, step one is to fit these studs into the block. It's my understanding that the shorter part of the thread goes into the block, and then gasket over the top, and then the manifold. Now when I saw that the manifold had detached itself, one of my main concerns was that some of these studs would have snapped in the block, and that would have made it really difficult to repair, because of course getting a drill in here to drill out any snapped threads would be really difficult. So it would have been a case probably of lifting the engine or dropping the engine to get those out, which would have been obviously a massive job in itself. Thankfully, I think it's all clear, so it should be a case of just screwing these in as tight as they'll go, and then gasket over the top. Well, it just took me all of 30 seconds before I dropped the first stud on the ground, so that went well. It's also starting to rain, so not the ideal start to this repair, but we move. So some of the studs were quite difficult to get into the block, and I think this was probably due to just sort of debris being on the threads inside the block. Just taking a couple of nuts, put them on the long part of the thread on the stud so that they're tight, and then I can use a spanner to sort of tighten the stud into the block, and then once it's all the way up to this neck, I can then obviously use a couple of spanners to hold this first one still whilst loosening this, and then they both come off. So it just makes it a bit easier than, you know, screwing it in by hand. I'm on to the last one now. They have been a bit awkward to get to, but hopefully we can then move on to putting the manifold back on. Well, with all the studs now in, it's gasket time, so let's take this bad boy out. And this is the easy bit of the job, just chucking this on. And with the gasket on, we can now attempt to put the manifold on. manifold on, I can hold it in place and put the locking nuts over the top. Then we should be good to go. They need torquing up to 45 Newton meters. Got a handy little guide. And once they're all on, there is actually a sequence as well that you need to put those on in, which is quite important to follow. So you essentially start in the middle and work your way out. So there's one in the centre, which you should start with. Then you do the two either side of it, doesn't really matter which. And then once you've done the three inside, you do the two sides. So let's do that now. So what I'll probably do is put them all on sort of finger tight, and then I'll work through them in sequence as suggested. Just put them on finger tight so that it holds the manifold in place really. So I've put all of the lock nuts on with my fingers, and now I'm going to use this torque wrench set to 45 Newton meters. I'm going to work in that sequence, just sort of tightening them up gradually. So I won't tighten one to its fullest and then the next one to its fullest. I'll do them all gradually in sequence, just so that the pressure is applied evenly to the gasket basically, just to make sure you get a good seal. Awkward to get to, that must be said. So with the manifold now fitted back to the block, we can now see the alternator down here. Now this is going to be frankly impossible for me to film, but what we need to do is remove this cover first. So there's a rear cover on the alternator. It's held on by these two nuts, and there's a posi screw at the bottom. So once we've removed those, the cover will come off, and then there are three screws holding the regulator in place, which we can remove. There is a heat shield here which is attached to the engine, and I'm hoping that we don't need to remove that, and I'm really hoping that we don't have to remove the alternator, because that would be obviously a lot more work, and when I can cut corners I will. So we'll try and get this cover off now, and we'll see how it goes. So I've just removed one of the nuts, which was this one here, which also has the wiring connected to it as well, and the other one was in line with these prongs underneath, so just there where I'm pointing. Finally, there's one posi screw just down here which needs removing, and then this cover will lift off. So as you can see, I've got the cover off the alternator. It said online that this screw in here would be a posi screw, but it's actually a Phillips. So if you're doing yours, just bear in mind it could be either. And then there's two nuts. You've got one which is 14 and one which is 13. So I've just come inside briefly to take a look at the old alternator regulator. Now I've got it off, and it doesn't take much looking to see just how much damage there is where the manifold is sat on top of it. It's quite incredible actually to see just how much it's melted away, and of course this whole area here should have a female part of the plug adapter on there. This whole plug would sit there, but you can see that it's actually all fused onto the plug itself. And then here on the bottom you should have two spring-loaded brushes. You can see one working as it should, but the other one is, well, the plastic has melted away and this spring has popped out, and it looks like it's sort of become one with the plastic, and as a result that brush is completely useless. Hence why I suppose the alternator failed, and so when I fit the new one, in theory it should solve the issue. So here you can see the difference between the old plug and the new one. Of course this old one, not only is the plug itself melted, but you've actually got the female section of the regulator as well, which has fused itself on there. And then this nice new one, which we're going to be putting in its place. So as you can see, sort of, now replace the plug, which will go into the new regulator. So the next thing to do is drop in the new regulator here. Now this is going to be really difficult to film, but I'll do my best. And then once the new regulator's in, it'll be a case of doing up the screws that were holding it in. Okay, so the situation now, first of all, as you can see, it's night time. I had to postpone temporarily proceedings while the heavens opened, but we're back now, and as you've seen, I've refitted the alternator regulator, so now it's time to put this cover back on. And if you remember, there's a 13mm nut and a 14mm nut, and then a posi screw at the bottom, which turned out to be a Phillips screw for me. So I'm just going to refit that now. Appreciate you can't really see what I'm doing at this point, but it's raining and it's dark, and I just want this done. So you're not going to see. Right then, so that is the alternator regulator and the alternator cover back on. Quite fiddly, especially in the dark, but all seems to be okay. So the final thing to do is to attach the new plug that I've fitted, and then pop the battery back into the front, and then in theory that should be job done. Okay, so in theory, when I put this key in and turn it, the car should start. What we've done is obviously refitted the manifold, so that should reduce the noise considerably, and we've replaced the alternator regulator and the plug that goes from sort of the main wiring of the car to the alternator, and therefore now that the battery's back in, that should give power to the alternator, and the alternator should continue to generate that power. So, key in, neutral, that's normal.